Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale, Wyzox AI, and Benny Keith Foods. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. On this episode of Tips from Trestle, I'm chatting with Chris Catania. Chris is a community leadership expert and author based in Southern California who helps leaders leverage community building to maximize ROI and drive business results. He specializes in teaching modern leaders how to scale authentic connections through both digital and in-person strategies that translate to measurable outcomes. His upcoming book, The Community First Advantage, explores the science-backed approach to community building, including how it strengthens employee engagement and customer loyalty. Chris has worked with major Fortune 500 companies, helping them transform their approach through community-first leadership principles. Chris, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm glad that our mutual connection, Joseph Cope, put us together, because one of the things that I have learned over all of my years of leadership is that the way we have to approach leadership has changed. And I have become a student of more of what people might call soft skills and those kinds of things. But experts like you have taken some of those and really turned them into true business strategies. So one of the things that you focused your work on is scaling authenticity. And so I'd love for you to kind of start us out here and talk about how our senior living leaders can maintain genuine connections when managing multiple communities or large teams.
Great intro, because I think, like you said, the historical way that leaders operate, the old legacy operating systems, I think are outdated, unfortunately. And, things are moving so fast, right? And I think the leaders that are agile and, can really adapt to their environment, both strategically, but also these other levels of emotional intelligence, servant leadership, all these different things. I've had a chance to build communities for large organizations, work with leaders to help essentially convince them and persuade them that what they might have believed as something that was like a time waster or something you do when you're bored or, maybe when you need help, right, is actually a business strategy. And the ideas and what makes communities so powerful for people, because communities have been around really since the beginning of time when you think about it, right? But we often don't stop and think, well, why are communities so important to us, right? Like, why is human connection so important? And I think that what leaders can do, and what I often walk leaders through, is first the mindset piece and understanding why community is so important. And what I've discovered and known to be true for a long time, but now this neuroscience has actually backed this up. So there's a gentleman by the name Paul Zak who's done a lot of really interesting research that shows that really at a neurochemical level, the oxytocin that we all have actually shows that when people are connected and feel connected, that rises and that makes us feel good. So when you're talking with a leader who's like, oh, community, that's something to do when we figure out the bigger business strategy, or that's a soft thing, or it's not essential. It's like, well, if you don't have people, if you don't have customers, if you don't have employees, like you don't have a company. What's inside of those people is these desires, these basic fundamental things. So it first starts with a mindset and understanding that there's so much science and there's all these research that shows that seniors, they tend to be more prone to isolation. This research that I was looking at, like in 2023, it was showing that it was like 34% of US adults, 50 to 80 experience isolation. And that's just one of the stats that really motivates me to help leaders, because there's nothing more important than prioritizing community as a leader to make sure that your people are connected, your customers are connected. And of course, we'll get into more of this later, but why that is a competitive advantage. And like when you look at the bottom line, leaders, they're held accountable to making money, saving money. You don't have a business if you don't do those things, right? So it's super powerful. Yeah.
It is. And one of the things that, as you were kind of explaining all of that there, that struck me is one of the things that I say often is that senior living, it's relational hospitality, and we're people serving people, right? And everything you just said there about connection and building relationships as a business tool is, I think, even more important in our space because of what we do and who we work with. And you mentioning the social isolation piece is so important because it's a huge, huge component of something we have to manage and deal with every day. And so one of the things you have you call it your ADAPT model. And when we first connected, you walked me through it. I was really intrigued by how it works as a framework and how you use it. So I'd love for you to give us a high level overview of it and then talk a little bit about how that authenticity can impact bottom line operations in senior living.
Yeah, the ADAPT model. So I call it ADAPT because I believe that community is an essential adaptation tool for businesses to be able to be agile in the marketplace or be able to adapt to employee changes and culture changes, things like that. So that's the genesis of that. But ADAPT stands for a few different letters. So the first one is authenticity. That's the ability to show up as yourself, be emotionally aware, and just be your authentic self. And D is decision. So that's like not just making decisions unilaterally or by yourself, but thinking of co-creation, collaboration, including the community in your decision and going out to the crowd, right? And being inclusive in that. And then the A stands for the agility. So being able to be agile, if you're taking information, you're being collaborative, being able to go, oh, okay, I have the emotional intelligence to go, okay, I need to change this, or I need to adjust what's happening. I need to change the dial. I get a different signal coming in with that and change it. P stands for purpose. So getting everybody aligned and making sure that the community and everybody is aligned. When you build community, you usually have guiding principles. One of the things I share with people is that community principles can be helpful, be human, be smart. And essentially a company is a community when you really think about it. But that purpose is a shared purpose. And that's what the P is for. And then trust. So showing consistency over time, building that relationship and being relationship focused. So that's a kind of a 30,000 foot schema across the top. But when you put all that together, ADAPT is this powerful framework that I've used to help leaders navigate going from being what I call community skeptic to community champion. And in the middle, I work with a lot of leaders who are community curious, so I use that ADAPT model to go, okay, here's how you develop the mindset. And then there's a bunch of other tools, once you get that mindset, then you have to start making these things operational. And then there's other frameworks and tools that help to go, okay, how do we actually launch an online community, or how do we build face-to-face in real life community?
Yeah. And one of the things that, because it's a starting point, like you said, but one of the things that I think is so intriguing is with all of these, what feel like softer skills, if you're coming from that older leadership mindset, it's like, well, don't just be warm and fuzzy and people will like you. At least that's the way the old leadership model would think of it. What are some of the biggest misconceptions leaders have about community building with it being warm and fuzzy versus actually being a measurable business strategy?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions is you say warm and fuzzy, but at the end of the day, we have to inspire people with the business mission, with the customer experience. And you have to be able to connect people with that, right? And that's what the power of community it does. So it allows you to understand that you have to build relationships, you have to build connection, and that warm and fuzzy. If you go back to that science piece, is that warm and fuzzy can't be measured, or warm and fuzzy is not important, right? So you look at spreadsheets, you look at data, we look at bottom lines, and a lot of leaders make decisions based off of graphs and charts and things like that. And they think that human emotion can't be measured. They think that human connection can't be measured. That's just not the case anymore. I mean, there's so much data that shows that when you look at the oxytocin levels, when companies specifically build in programs and processes that build connection and build trust, that they've actually shown, like Zappos, there's a study done where they had this tracker on them to show this importance of it in a non, creepy way. It was actually pretty powerful to the point that building in trust, building in these things, they actually show that the level of trust, our blood actually shows that there's deeper trust, culture improved, and it makes people want to stay. And you start to build that connection between the customers and the staff. So, I mean, if you're trying to build a culture within a senior living experience, what's more important than those connections, letting the people, the staff know that they're important in executing that experience, but also that connection that the staff has with the people. So it kind of goes what I call from the inside out. That's that. But misconception is, one, you can't measure it. Two, if you can't measure it, it's not important. And then it kind of goes from there. And that, again, if leaders think they can't measure it, then they think it's not important.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad, because that's when they miss out on this massive opportunity, when you go back to just how we're wired up as humans, that we need that connection.
Yeah, definitely. And what strikes me as odd is when you look at the stories that we tell in senior living around marketing and promoting our services and our communities, it's all about the connection and like making connection with fellow residents and people your age, or the connections you can make with the staff who are taking care of you. But then it doesn't ever really get translated down into that next level of, okay, what are the business metrics around this? How do we measure that? How do we make success internally with that as a strategy? And so you mentioned Zappos, and one of the things they do, if you've got any other of those kind of examples of companies that are applying community first principles, I'd love to hear those, because I'd love to figure out a way to help our operators maybe adapt things that are working out there in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that often gets talked about, but the behind the scenes story of this company is not usually that well known in the context of community and this journey that leaders have to go on, right? Because you often hear about what worked, and the shiny story, but you don't often hear there was a lot of hard work that led to that. So the company I'm talking about is Lego. Everybody knows Lego. We were all familiar with that story. Early 2000s, they were about 800 million in debt, right? And they were on the verge of becoming obsolete. They didn't understand who their customers were. And there was a team that understood, and they were listening to this group of people that were playing with their toys. And they were actually not just playing, but they were actually using it in a very creative way. They were doing it in an online community. And back then, the online community was perceived as a place of play. It wasn't necessarily a marketing channel. It wasn't seen as like, hey, we should pay attention to this. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing with the toy stores, and who cares about this group of adults playing with Lego, right? Yeah. So there was a group of people within Lego that began to talk to leadership. And there was a series of 3 leaders who, over a period of 10 years, carried on this vision. And there was one leader, Brad Just, I think it's saying his name correctly, in the early days of that Lego journey, who went on that online community and was honest with that community and said, hey, we're listening to you, and we're going to prioritize this. We're no longer going to just disregard you. So that was a big risk, right? And that when you're a leader, you have to show, hey, I'm going to make this decision. It's going to impact us financially, strategically. So that's a huge risk that leader just took at that time. But it was the right one, because then they began to get the trust, and the customers were saying, oh, this is great. They're listening to us. Product teams are actually going to take our thoughts and our advice with that. So what often happens is, with just any kind of leadership, leadership changes, right?
Yeah.
So what's unique about the Lego story, and what I love telling about it, is that I call it this relay race, because when you're handing the baton off, and that leader just held it off to Niles J, I think is the next leader, and then he handed it off to the next leader, and they essentially carried on this legacy. And I think it's important, that leaders understand that journey for a couple of reasons. That it took time. We're talking about a transformational, almost 10-year period, right? And what leaders often think, and because leaders are under such intense pressure, is that something like community is often thought of oh, it should just turn a result, quarterly, right? Because you have the pressures of the market, you have pressures of quarter to quarter. What's your numbers, right? So those leaders at Lego were courageous enough to go, we're going to see this through. And over 10 years, right? That's a long time to believe in something, string it through with that. So what we know as Lego today, that story, that's the idea, is that this is a long game. Community is a long game, just like relationships, just like making a great meal. And I often say that community is like a fine meal. You can't microwave it. It's something that takes time. And leaders, sometimes they think, oh, we're just going to pop this in the microwave for a minute to 30 seconds and bam, we're going to have a community, or we're going to have trust. I don't know any relationships that develop like that. If you're a leader listening to this, you don't have to do exactly like Lego. You just have to have that mindset and then go, okay, how do we launch this, embed it, integrate it into our business strategy?
Absolutely. One of the things you talked about earlier was making that connection to the bottom line numbers. We look at things in black and white as business leaders. You just mentioned thinking quarter to quarter as opposed to year or 5 years or 10 years down the road. And so how can leaders in any industry, but senior living specifically, how can they start to really measure ROI of putting these kind of community initiatives in place and really have something that they continue to look at beyond some of the more traditional metrics that we think of?
For over a century, Benny Keith has been a trusted leader in the food service industry. As a broadline distributor, we offer an extensive selection of products, delivering to 21 states through 10 distribution centers. We can help you create a thriving culinary culture by pairing quality products with customized solutions that elevate your residents' dining experience. Our team of registered dietitians provide unmatched customer service by modifying menus, selecting recipes, ensuring regulatory compliance, and more. Quality, value, and service are at the heart of everything we do. Benny Keith Foods puts the care back in healthcare.
Yeah, I think ROI is certainly interesting. You also leave out value, because I've worked with leaders who actually don't care about ROI in a traditional sense, because they know that it's just the right thing to do, right? Because they get that innate power of community. Hey, we're human, and it's a center of our business. That's great. I've actually worked with leaders that believe that, but I go, hey, we should actually measure it. Let's do both.
Right, exactly.
With that. So there are ways, and again, it's unique to each organization, but you can set up certain processes that align with your surveys. You can do different testing to show, hey, if we do this initiative, if we build this online community, it can create these stories, case studies, and connect it to retention. If you have a program in a senior facility over here, but don't have one over here, or don't introduce a program there, but introduce it over there, you can actually test how connected those people feel, vice versa. So there's different ways to show that. And what you want to do too is not just look at the customer experience, but also the employee experience. Look at, If you have certain programs in place, have you seen an increase in retention? Have you seen increase through different surveys, and things like that? So there's a whole host of ways that you do that. And there's a whole framework that I use called the 3 E's that makes sure that when you are operationalizing community in your business, you want to know where the experience is, where you're going to embed it in your experience, how are you going to enable staff, and then how are you going to evaluate it? Use the hard metrics, ROI, and combine that with the storytelling. So those are all the ways. But man, it really is undeniable. We could have a whole episode just about ROI, to be honest.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
So
It's interesting because you just mentioned the value piece when you were talking about the leaders are like, well, I don't want to measure the ROI, but I know there's value here. And I sit here and think, well, as you build community, there's probably a few metrics as you build a community, as you retain community, as you retain employees, where you can measure that value or the potential value of that community. And it may not be something that you would normally think of just, that every one person we add is an extra $7 in revenue. There's more to it than that based on what I've heard you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, famously, I think it was Gary Vee who said, can you measure the ROI of your mom? That's no, right? I mean, honestly, if you look at some ROI models, they're kind of squishy, but I always say you need to have a balanced approach. You should not measure community, because in 2025 and beyond, there are models, there are metrics to do it in what I call triangulation of ROI. So you're not getting like an exact number all the time, but you're taking this piece of data from this part of the business and you're taking your community data over here, taking another piece of data from another part of your business, and you're kind of creating this range of that. So like in a online technical support community, for example, companies have online communities to deflect support calls that are repeat, that are basic, that actually, if they called in, they'd cost them hundreds of dollars to do that. So they know that if they launch this online community, like Microsoft, for example, they know for certain, based off of their ROI models, that online community that they launched, they've had for years, saves them about $80 million a year. So that's just the technical support community, right?
Yeah.
That's not even talking about the impact of that community on growth. And that's just online community. Like I was saying, you put in place different programs. I've seen companies embed their community initiatives for culture or customer into their existing CX strategy. Like that's something that a lot of leaders get wrong too, is I don't think intentionally, but they just don't think of it in the sense of like, let's embed community into everything that we do, not just like, community is over here.
Yeah.
Embed your community into marketing, into HR. That's why I always start at the top with the mindset, like being able to think of community as a strategic driver, influencing everything.
Interesting that you say it that way, because one of the things that in senior living we're notoriously bad about doing is siloing all of our various departments. And everybody kind of does their own little thing in their own work. And they might be over here doing one thing and marketing's over here doing another thing. And so building that community as, like you said, that overarching strategic approach can kind of help us maybe knock down some of those silo walls as well. So.
100%. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that. And sometimes too, what's interesting is that leaders don't often understand that community can be pretty powerful. Sometimes when you launch an online community internally for your staff, it will reflect your culture at first. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how your culture is. Launch a community and it'll tell you, be aware, but also that's a great opportunity because you'll learn things. You're like, I had no idea that this team said this over here. Or when you use community to break down silos, you start being able to get people to get to knowledge faster. You get better ideas. You can scale things faster. And community is fantastic at breaking down those silos within an organization too.
Yeah. I love what you said there about the online community within the employees. I especially think about it from my vantage point of working with multiple locations and multiple operators who they may have 15 locations in 5 different states. And so try and get their culture through and get their teams collaborating for best practices and things like that, they've got to come up with something like what you're talking about online or some technology to really focus on pushing that and really building that culture out. As we wrap up, what would be, if you had to think about everything we've just talked about and you wanted to tell a senior living operator, you just need to get basic start here on this community first framework, and we're going to start tomorrow. What's the one element or the one big takeaway that you think they could use that would have the biggest, most immediate impact?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about this community stuff. It's perceived as just stuff, soft. And companies, if you're not already, your competition is probably already thinking about this stuff. Like, how do we do it? It's a great lever and tool asset for growth and competition. But I would say you have to be patient. Like, you have to play the long game. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon kind of thing. So I think that leaders often, they get caught up when they think about community as a quick fix, or if things don't work right at the get-go or something makes them uncomfortable, they shut it down. But don't do that. I've seen leaders transform when they really adopt that. Because if you become a leader and your organization transforms, then you transform the market, then that's how you change the world. And that's kind of how this all goes around and begins to flow out. So it's just an amazing opportunity for those leaders who it clicks for and get it. Like, you're going to be ahead of your other peers, and you're going to be able to deliver, I think, a better level of service for your customers and your staff. You'll be a better leader when you're community-led as well.
Everything you said there makes sense. I love the evolution of change your thoughts, change your team, change your market, change the world. That's such a powerful message for me, at least. So, Chris, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'd love for you to share how people can follow you, how they can learn more about your work, maybe even how they could get a hold of your book and give it a good read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can go to my website. That's Chris Catania. That's CATANIA.co. And you can go /resources, and then that'll be where you can find out about the book. It's called Community First Advantage: How Modern Leaders Use Community to Drive Growth, Cut Costs, and Compete in a Changing World. LinkedIn, I'm always sharing insights. LinkedIn is a great way to do that too. And I have a Substack coming out soon and all that stuff. So, and the book will be coming out in a few short weeks as well.
Very good. Well, Chris, again, thank you so much for your time. Love these kind of conversations where we take the quote unquote soft skills and turn them into business strategy or learn of how people are doing that. It's so fascinating. And I think for senior living operators and leaders, it should be like just second nature. We already work with people. So like, turn this into your business strategy. Don't just think of it as fluff. So I appreciate you coming on today and being a guest with me here on Tips from Trestle.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Aaron.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.